act as if nothing affects you and see God's glory. When storms rise and doubts whisper, remain still, not because you're immune to pain, but because your trust is anchored in something greater than the moment. We are not called to pretend life is easy, but to walk through its weight with a quiet confidence, one that says, even this will pass, and I will still be standing. When we stop reacting to every slight, every challenge, every delay, we give space for something holy to enter. Peace is not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of God in the middle of it. And when you refuse to be shaken, not in arrogance, but in faith, the heavens respond. Not loudly, not always immediately, but with quiet power and divine timing. You might not see the full picture now. It might look like you're losing, but God does his best work in silence, in stillness, in surrender. And when you choose not to be moved by what you see, but trust what you believe, that's when his glory begins to shine through you. So hold your peace, keep your posture, speak only when needed, and walk like you know who holds the world. This isn't about being cold or indifferent. It's about being deeply rooted. And when you're rooted, no wind can uproot you. Be still. Act as if nothing can shake your spirit, not because of who you are, but because of who he is. And in that stillness, in that strength, you will see God's glory unfold right before your eyes. When you refuse to be disturbed by external chaos, you reflect a deep trust in God's plan. This calmness isn't denial. It's faith in action. It's not about pretending nothing's wrong, but about believing that no matter what goes wrong, God remains in control. Life will always bring uncertainty, things we can't plan, pain we didn't expect, delays we didn't anticipate. But the person who trusts in God walks through all of it with a different posture. They don't flinch at every change in the wind. They don't panic when plans fall apart. They may feel the pressure, but they don't crumble, because their peace doesn't come from the world. It comes from the one who made the world. To act as if nothing affects you is not to shut down emotionally or ignore reality. It means you have chosen where your attention and your energy go. You've decided not to react to every disturbance, not because you don't care, but because you've placed your confidence in something bigger. That kind of stillness only comes from knowing God's character. You learn to rest not because the battle is over, but because you know who's fighting it for you. You don't rush to fix everything or respond to every voice because you've already heard the voice that matters most. When your peace is grounded in God, you're no longer controlled by what people say or what situations look like. You can have calm in your soul even when the storm rages around you. This is what it means to walk by faith, not by sight. You may not see the answer yet, but you trust the God who holds it. You may not understand the reason for the delay, but you know God's timing is never off. And when others expect you to fall apart, they find you standing unshaken, your spirit quiet but firm. This kind of peace becomes a witness. It speaks louder than your words. People notice when you're not anxious like they are, when you're not bitter, when you're not panicking under pressure, and it causes them to ask why. That moment becomes an invitation for God's glory to be seen through your life. Your peace becomes a reflection of his power. Your ability to stay steady becomes a mirror of his strength. And without even trying, you become a vessel through which others catch a glimpse of God's presence. But this isn't something that happens overnight. It takes practice. It takes surrender. It takes choosing to believe that God is who he says he is, even when everything around you suggests otherwise. You have to remind yourself daily, my peace is not based on my situation. It's based on my Savior. And when that becomes your foundation, the ups and downs of life don't hold the same power over you. You stop being emotionally tossed around. You grow into someone who can carry the weight of life without it crushing you. There is something deeply powerful about staying calm when everything tells you to panic. It's not apathy, it's authority, it's spiritual maturity. You know what you carry. You know who walks with you. You know that nothing touches you without first going through God's hands. And when that becomes your truth, fear loses its grip. Anxiety starts to fade. Pressure no longer defines you. Instead, peace begins to lead the way. Not a shallow peace, but the kind that comes from deep communion with God. The kind that isn't shaken by change because it's anchored in eternity. It's a decision you make every day to stay grounded, to stay still, to keep your eyes on God, not the storm. And in that stillness, God moves. In that trust, He begins to unfold His plans in ways you couldn't have imagined. While others are running in circles trying to fix everything, you wait in confidence and you see His glory appear. Not always suddenly, not always how you expect, but always in a way that reminds you He was working all along. So when you act as if nothing affects you, you're not pretending to be strong. You're declaring that your strength comes from God. You're choosing not to be pulled into the chaos because you've already chosen your place of rest. And in that rest, His glory becomes visible. His peace becomes your shield. And your life becomes a living example of what it means to trust without seeing, to stand without shaking, and to live with a peace that passes understanding. That is how you see God's glory, not just around you, but within you. In stillness and surrender, you create room for God's voice to be heard. He often moves most powerfully when we stop trying to control the outcome. Life today is full of noise, constant distractions, responsibilities, and the pressure to always be doing something, fixing something, proving something. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that movement equals progress, or that if we're not speaking, we're being passive. But the truth is, some of the most powerful moments in the spiritual life happen in silence. When we choose to be still, when we let go of our striving, we make space for the presence of God to become real to us in a deeper way. We're so used to trying to manage every detail of our lives. We plan, we worry, we calculate, we adjust, and when things don't go our way, we often go straight into problem-solving mode. But there are times when God is asking us to stop, not because He wants us to give up, but because He wants us to look up. Silence isn't weakness, it's trust. When we become quiet, when we stop filling every space with our own thoughts or actions, we are admitting something important, that we don't have all the answers, and we don't need to. God's wisdom is greater, His vision is clearer, and His plan is better than anything we could orchestrate on our own. It's in the quiet places that we begin to hear what we've been too busy to notice. God's voice is not always loud. It doesn't shout over the noise of our anxiety or the chaos of our surroundings. More often it comes like a whisper, and only those who are listening closely will catch it. Stillness trains us to hear differently. When we stop trying to force things to happen, we start to recognize the gentle ways that God is already working. He opens doors we didn't knock on. He brings peace we didn't know we needed. He speaks clarity into confusion, but only when we're willing to slow down enough to. There's something sacred about choosing silence in a world that values noise. It shows that you're not moved by pressure or performance, but by purpose. Sometimes God wants to speak a word of direction, but we're too loud with our own plans to hear it. Other times, He wants to bring comfort, but we're too busy distracting ourselves from pain. Silence becomes the doorway to encounter. It's where we shift from trying to make things happen to letting God move in His time and in His way. And when that shift happens, everything changes. Surrender is not about giving up your dreams or desires. It's about placing them in the hands of the one who knows what's best. When we're silent before God, we're not ignoring our problems, we're offering them up. We're saying, Lord, I trust you more than I trust myself. That kind of faith invites divine intervention. It allows God to work in ways we couldn't predict. And often, the moment we step back is the moment He steps in. We see this principle again and again in Scripture. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea, God didn't tell them to run or fight. He told them to be still and watch Him deliver them. When Elijah waited to hear from God, he didn't find Him in the wind, the fire, or the earthquake. He found Him in a gentle whisper. Jesus Himself often withdrew from the crowds to pray in solitude, showing us that intimacy with the Father is birthed in quiet moments. These examples remind us that silence is not empty. It's full of God's presence when we allow it to be. We don't need to have everything figured out to rest in silence. In fact, silence becomes a declaration of faith when everything feels uncertain. It says, I'm not panicking, I'm not rushing, I'm waiting because I believe God is working even when I can't see it. That kind of peace is rare and it doesn't come easily. It requires discipline to quiet your thoughts and resist the urge to react. But in that space, your spirit becomes sensitive, your heart becomes open, and you begin to hear God speak in ways that change everything. In silence, God reveals not only direction, but also identity. He reminds us who we are and whose we are. He strengthens our inner world so that we're not dependent on what happens externally. This is where real transformation happens, not just in what we do, but in who we become. We grow in wisdom and patience, in discernment. We learn to wait well, to listen fully, and to trust deeply. So when life pushes you to react, take a breath and remember, silence is not weakness, it's warfare. It's where battles are won not by force, but by faith. It's where God begins to move behind the scenes in ways you couldn't even ask for. And when you stop trying to control everything, you open yourself up to the fullness of what He wants to do. Make time for stillness, protect silence, let it become a sacred rhythm in your life, because in that silence you'll begin to hear what really matters. You'll feel God's presence more clearly, and in that space you'll discover that He's been speaking all along, waiting for you to be still enough to listen. True strength doesn't need to prove itself. When you act as if nothing affects you, you're showing that your strength comes from a higher source. Spiritual strength is not measured by how loud you can be in defending yourself, how quickly you react to criticism, or how visibly you fight your battles. It's revealed in the calmness of your spirit, in the quiet confidence that says, I don't need to respond to everything because I know who fights for me. The world often celebrates loud power, the kind that pushes back, demands attention, and insists on being seen. But the kind of strength that lasts, the kind that truly transforms lives, is quiet and unshakable. There is a deep maturity in not having to respond to every challenge or prove your worth at every turn. When someone misjudges you, when life throws something unfair your way, when people expect you to fall apart, your silence, your calm, your peace becomes your answer. Not because you're avoiding the situation, but because you know that your identity is not tied to how others see you or what they say. It's tied to something much deeper. When your strength is rooted in God, you no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. You just live it. That kind of quiet strength is powerful because it is not driven by ego. It is not fueled by the need for approval or recognition. It is founded on relationship. Your relationship with God. You know you are seen by Him, heard by Him, loved by Him, and that is enough. You can walk through the fire without shouting because you know you're not alone in it. You can carry the weight without collapsing because you're drawing strength from something that doesn't. You can forgive instead of retaliate because you've received grace yourself. And in every quiet act of faith, you are declaring that God is your source, your defender, your strength. There's a kind of peace that confuses people when they expect anger and you give patience, when they expect panic and you respond with trust, when they expect you to give up but you keep going. That is the evidence of spiritual strength. It doesn't draw attention to itself, but it leaves an impact. People may not always understand it, but they can't ignore it. Because that kind of peace isn't natural, it's supernatural. On life, It comes from a life surrendered to something greater than itself. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, where opinions are shouted and defenses are high, choosing quiet strength is countercultural. But it's exactly what we're called to. Jesus himself embodied this. He had all power, all authority, yet he didn't use it to dominate or impress. He washed feet. He stayed silent in front of his accusers. He didn't have to prove he was the Son of God. He lived it. And his greatest victory came not through shouting or resistance, but through surrender and sacrifice. That's the example of real strength. There's something deeply beautiful about walking into a storm and not being moved by it. You feel the wind, you hear the noise, but your steps don't change. That doesn't mean you're unaffected emotionally. It means your emotions don't control your behavior. It means your spirit is governed by something stronger than circumstances. You may feel afraid, but you don't live in fear. You may feel uncertain, but you don't crumble under pressure. You remain steady, not because of your own power, but because you trust the one who holds the world together. Spiritual strength also means choosing your battles wisely. It's knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, when to step forward and when to wait. It's not about never feeling weak. It's about knowing where to go when you do. The strongest people are not those who never struggle, but those who know how to remain grounded in God through the struggle. They keep showing up, keep believing, keep loving, even when it's hard. That's strength. And the more you walk in this kind of strength, the less you need the world's approval. You begin to live with a deep assurance that even if no one else sees what you're doing, God does. Even if no one else understands your peace, He does. And that is enough. You're not swayed by opinions or overwhelmed by circumstances. You are anchored. That anchor doesn't remove the waves, but it keeps you steady through them. So when you act as if nothing affects you, it's not pride or indifference. It's a quiet declaration that says, I trust God more than I trust what I see. It's a posture of surrender and strength at the same time. And it is through that posture that God's presence is revealed, not just to you, but to those around you. Your life becomes a reflection of His peace, His patience, His endurance. That's spiritual strength, and it's often quiet, but always powerful. When the world sees you stand firm through storms, they see a glimpse of God's glory in you. Your consistency becomes a testimony. In a world where everything feels temporary and fragile, where emotions swing with circumstances, and people often change direction with every difficulty, stability is rare. Yet it is in stability that God's nature is reflected most clearly. He is unchanging, constant, and faithful. When you, as His child, walk in that same spirit of steadiness, it points others to Him. It tells a different story, one that says peace is possible, hope is lasting, and faith is not just an idea, but a way of life. Stability doesn't mean you never feel pain or face problems. It means that when you do, you don't let them move you away from what you believe. You don't let storms define your identity or change your direction. You remain grounded in your trust in God, even when the ground around you is shaking. That kind of life speaks volumes to those watching. It draws attention, not to you, but to the one holding you steady. The world sees your quiet strength, your patience, your unwavering faith, and through that, they begin to see God's character. Being consistent in your faith doesn't require a platform or a title. It simply requires choosing to stand when it would be easier to fall. It means continuing to show up, to believe, to serve, and to love, even when life is hard. You don't have to speak loudly about God to reflect Him. Sometimes just being faithful in the middle of chaos is enough to shine a light. People notice when you don't give up. They pay attention when you remain kind in adversity, when you keep praying despite delays, when you live with integrity even when no one is watching. God's glory isn't always revealed in dramatic moments or miraculous signs. Often it's revealed in the day-to-day choices of someone who refuses to be shaken. The quiet strength of a life rooted in God is powerful. It tells the world that there's something more, something deeper, something greater than the struggle. It reminds people that God is real and present even when life is uncertain. Your ability to remain steady can be the very thing that leads someone else to find faith. Not because you have all the answers, but because your life displays a peace that goes beyond understanding. Consistency is a kind of worship. When you live with integrity, when your words match your actions, when your love remains strong in every season, you're offering your life as a reflection of God's faithfulness. He doesn't change with the seasons, and when you choose to remain faithful through all of yours, people begin to see that truth in action. They might not recognize it right away, but your life plants seeds, seeds of hope, of trust, of curiosity about the God who gives you that strength. We live in a culture that often glorifies fast results and dramatic change, but God builds differently. He values endurance, faithfulness, and slow, steady growth. He honors those who keep showing up, who continue to trust even when it hurts. And His glory is often revealed most beautifully through those who walk with Him consistently, day in and day out. When you remain stable, you're living in alignment with His nature. You're saying, even if nothing changes, I still believe. Even if I don't see the answer yet, I won't walk away. That kind of faith draws heaven close. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more people who can walk through the fire without losing their peace. People who don't need to prove anything, who simply live in quiet confidence that God is who He says He is. Stability speaks of a relationship that is not based on circumstances, but on covenant. And that is powerful. That is what changes atmospheres. When someone sees that you're still standing after the storm, they begin to ask how. And that how opens the door for you to point them to God. Being stable doesn't mean you're perfect. It means you're rooted. It means you know where your help comes from, and you refuse to be moved by anything less than the truth of God's promises. You may be tired, you may be stretched, but you're not breaking, you're not giving up. And in that quiet endurance, God's glory shines. It's not about trying to impress anyone. It's about living a life so anchored in Him that your very existence becomes a light in someone else's darkness. So stand firm, not in your own strength, but in His. Keep walking, even if it's slow. Keep believing, even if the answer hasn't come. Keep showing love, even when it's not returned. Every time you choose consistency over chaos, every time you choose faith over fear, you are becoming a living testimony. And through that testimony, the world gets to see a God who never fails. His glory shines through your stability, not because you're strong, but because you've chosen to lean on the one who is. Challenges will come, but they are not meant to break you. They're meant to build you. The less you react to them, the more your faith matures. Resistance is not the enemy of faith. It is the very environment where faith is tested, refined, and made stronger. Without resistance, there is no growth. Just like a muscle is strengthened through tension and pressure, so too is your faith. It's in the places of discomfort and uncertainty that you find out what you truly believe and how deeply you trust the one who holds your life. Most people want a smooth path, one where everything makes sense, where nothing delays or disappoints. But the truth is, if life always went the way we wanted, we wouldn't need faith at all. We would rely on our plans, our timing, our understanding, but God allows resistance to develop something greater in us, dependence on Him. Resistance reveals what's real. It pulls to the surface the fears we hide, the doubts we ignore, and the areas where our trust is still shallow. And when we choose to remain steady through that resistance, when we choose to keep walking even when the way gets hard, faith begins to stretch and strengthen in ways we never imagined. Faith that has never been tested is fragile. It can look strong on the outside, but without roots, it won't stand when the winds come. Resistance pushes those roots deeper. It drives us to pray when we feel weak, to wait when we'd rather rush, to trust when everything in us wants to take control. Every challenge becomes a choice, to give in to fear or to grow in faith. The more we choose to believe, even in the absence of evidence, the stronger our spiritual foundation becomes. This growth doesn't happen in one moment. It happens through the repeated decision to not quit, to not complain, to not panic. It's the quiet work of endurance, the daily discipline of staying faithful even when you don't see results. Sometimes faith grows in the background, silently, hidden from others, but over time it produces visible fruit. Peace that doesn't make sense, joy that isn't tied to circumstances, hope that endures disappointment. God does not waste resistance. He uses it with purpose. The very thing that feels like an obstacle is often the instrument He's using to shape you. Resistance teaches you to rely on His strength instead of your own. It removes the illusion that you are in control, and it invites you into deeper dependence on the one who truly is. And in that dependence, you begin to experience a different kind of power, not loud, not flashy, but steady and sure. The less you react emotionally to resistance, the more you grow spiritually. You stop being thrown off by every challenge. You begin to see opposition not as punishment, but as preparation. You stop asking, why me, and start asking, what are you doing in me through this? That shift in mindset is a sign of maturity. It means your faith is no longer just about outcomes, it's about transformation. You're not just asking God to fix your situation, you're asking Him to change your heart through it. Some of the most profound growth happens in seasons where nothing seems to be moving. You pray and it feels silent. You wait and it feels endless. But even then, something is happening beneath the surface. God is building endurance. He's developing your character. He's aligning your heart with His will. And in time, you'll see that what you thought was a delay was actually a deepening. He was making you stronger, wiser, more anchored. You may not feel strong in the moment. Resistance can feel overwhelming, but it's not about how strong you feel. It's about how firmly you stand. Each time you resist the urge to give up, you're exercising your faith. Each time you choose peace over panic, you're growing. Each time you return to God instead of running from Him, you're deepening your relationship with Him. That is what growth looks like. Not perfection, but progress. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of persistence. When you look back, you'll see it. The seasons you thought would break you actually built you. The prayers you thought were unanswered were shaping your patience. The times you felt alone were teaching you to listen for God's still, small voice. And the resistance you faced became the training ground for a stronger, deeper, unshakable faith. So don't despise the resistance. Embrace it. Let it teach you, stretch you, refine you. Let it push you closer to God, not further from Him. Every challenge is an invitation to go deeper, to trust more, to grow in ways comfort never could provide. And as you grow, your life becomes a testimony not just of survival, but of strength. Not just of endurance, but of transformation. Because faith grows in resistance. And the more you lean into it, the more you'll see the beauty that's being built in you. A calm, grounded spirit influences others. When you carry peace, you invite God's presence to work through you and around you. It's easy to underestimate how much our inner state affects our surroundings. We tend to think change comes through action, through words, through visible efforts. But sometimes the most powerful shift in a room, in a family, or in a situation begins with someone who simply chooses to be still, to remain calm, to stay centered when everything around them is not. That's the quiet power of posture. The way you carry yourself inwardly can shape the spiritual atmosphere outwardly. When you walk into a room full of anxiety, conflict, or confusion, your presence speaks before you even say a word. If your spirit is steady, it radiates a kind of peace that others notice. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because peace cannot be faked. People can feel when you're grounded. They can sense when you're not ruled by emotion or pressure. And in those moments, something spiritual happens. Your posture becomes a vessel. It becomes an opening for God's presence to flow, not just in you, but through you. Others begin to breathe easier. They feel less on edge. Their hearts start to soften. All because one person chose not to match the chaos, but to bring calm into it. This doesn't mean you're pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It doesn't mean you suppress emotion or hide your struggles. It means that you've learned where to place those things. You bring your burdens to God in private so that you can carry His peace in public. You know how to rest in Him, even when your situation hasn't changed. That spiritual grounding creates a posture, one that stands tall, not in pride, and from that place you influence everything around you. Your posture says more than your words ever could. It speaks of trust when others are worried. It reflects hope when people expect despair. It offers stability in moments of tension. You don't need to raise your voice to carry authority. God's presence is your authority. When you're filled with His peace, you carry something the world cannot give and the world cannot explain. That's why people are drawn to someone who remains composed, not because they're emotionless, but because their emotions don't rule their spirit. Their posture shows that they've been with God. Jesus modeled this perfectly. He walked into storms without fear. He faced angry crowds without losing his peace. He stood silent before accusation, not because he was weak, but because he was grounded. His posture didn't come from the approval of people or the comfort of circumstances. It came from his connection with the Father. And we're called to carry that same spirit. When we stay close to God, we begin to carry His nature. We become peacemakers, not peacekeepers. We don't just try to keep things calm. We shift the atmosphere by bringing a higher presence into the situation. That kind of posture isn't developed overnight. It's formed in the quiet places, in your private moments with God, in the times when you choose prayer over panic, worship over worry, and stillness over striving. It's in those moments that you're shaped, that your spirit becomes rooted. And when your roots go deep, your posture becomes unshakable. Not because you're always strong, but because you know where your strength comes from. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is remain steady when everyone else is falling apart. Your calmness becomes a ministry. Your peace becomes a covering. People begin to come to you for clarity, not because you have all the answers, but because you're a safe place. Your posture tells them that even though things are uncertain, God is still in control. And that assurance can begin to heal, to restore, to bring unity where there was division.